Hey, what's up guys? Node Investor here. The market continues to chug higher. We're going to take a little bit of a mid-week update as we take a look at the overall crypto market cap, the BTC dominance chart. Real interesting to see how that one's looking right now. The altcoins continue to show better relative strength, especially the large cap names. We'll look at a few of those and we'll review the names that we looked at during the start of the week here. Some of the names that were on the watch list, the setups to be watching. How are they doing? How have things panned out? And some near-term targets to be watching. So let's take a look at BTC here first. We'll look at this chart and the dominance chart here. Looking at Bitcoin, of course, the steady grind higher just continues. Looked like there was a potential for things to roll over here at the start of the week, and wow, oh wow, the bulls have continued to show some resilience. Now admittedly, I did close out most of my BTC here over the weekend as things were looking a little shaky, and I thought this could be a red Monday, and of course it was a small pullback. Looked bigger when you look at the lower time frames, but didn't even close below the daily 10 EMA. The trend remains your friend, continues to move higher. I did not, however, jump back into my Bitcoin trades, and in fact I'm still out of that, but I did enter the altcoins instead. Some of the names that were on my watch list, some of the names that I was watching for potential breakouts to play catch up, that sort of thing. And that just continues to be the better place to be right now. The alts are showing some good relative strength, especially the bigger cap names. They continue to outperform. And so while Bitcoin continues to grind higher, if the alts continue to outperform, in my opinion, that's just a better place to be. How high does it go? Let's look at some bigger term targets here. So I'm going to zoom out. This is the daily chart of BTC USD on Coinbase. And there's a couple of key levels to be watching here. Of course, cracking over that 9 or that 10K number was a little bit of a psychological round number. So far, price has continued to hold above that. The moving averages are trending higher, which signifies the broader uptrend remains in place here. And we're a little bit of a no man's land here, a little bit of a support zone that was, or excuse me, a little bit of a chop zone that we saw here during this final consolidation in August and September. What I would be watching is the next big round number, really that 11K. Could it pause somewhere along the way before then? Of course, you know, 10.5, 10.7, but 11K looks like an interesting point here. It certainly is an inflection point. We saw that a couple of times here pose a good resistance level. This was also a little bit of an inflection point back here, the neckline of this little double top in June and July. So that round 11K is really the next big number that I'm going to be watching. If we do a Fibonacci retracement on this entire move here, basically from the June peak that we saw almost at 14K last year to the most recent swing low that we saw around 6,400, that 11K lines up very well with the 618 fib retracement level. Let me move this out of the way so you can see the number there. And if we zoom in, you know, that puts it at right around $11,035. So in and around that range would be an interesting level to be watching for a potential pause. That again is the 618 retracement from this big pullback, and the bounce would be up to that point here. So it's a key number. It's certainly an important Fibonacci number to be watching if you follow that. And the fact that it lines up with the next major inflection point would be something to note. The daily RSI has certainly cooled off a little bit. There is a slight divergence also showing up on the 4-hour chart, but it's not anywhere near these extreme overbought conditions. So it could just continue to grind higher, and then we see that last kind of big push up. If we zoom in here, however, and start looking at the lower time frames, and some of the folks on the Slack group have also noted this, and I think it's important to note, but when it comes to divergences, they're a little bit of a red flag, right? They're not always an automatic sell signal, because if price just continues to go higher, then it will just negate this, right? Divergences are one of those hindsight type of things where they're not really confirmed until price ultimately does roll over, but I do use them as a little bit of a cautionary flag, potentially signifying, hey, maybe we're in the later stages of this move and the momentum will start to slow. And that's essentially what it signifies, is the upside momentum is slowing relative to this first peak. The MACD histograms, however, are not confirming that, so a little bit of mixed signal there. That's why, you know, looking at just kind of trailing stops, pushing things up along the way as these new lows are established, and ultimately just looking at the broader chart, the broader uptrend that remains in place. It just depends on your strategy, if you're taking more of a longer hold swing position versus shorter term trading, if you're using margin, all of that. At this point though, however, since the start of 2020, the longer hold has really been the winner, and just kind of being a little bit more patient, buying the dips, the buyers just continue to show up. Will it continue? Of course, eventually there will be a pause, it will be a dip. It's just a matter of when, not if, but it's anyone's guess at what price that ultimately comes. I'm going to be watching basically from here up to around 11K as the next major resistance level on the BTC chart. But looking at the BTC dominance chart, let me flip over to that real quick. Until this really starts to change, the alts just continue to be the place to be. If we look at the broader picture here, we've seen a really quick spike lower. It is looking a little climactic as some of these big cap names are going up very fast versus Bitcoin. And that's ultimately what's driving this. The top 10 names have the most weight on this chart. And if names like Ethereum and XRP, Bitcoin Cash just really move fast, that's going to really drop this chart quickly here. And so we're seeing that pull in. I'm looking for somewhere near 62% as the next low. We hit 63 very briefly here today, but if we look out and go, just kind of zoom out left here, you know, this 62% was some near-term highs. And, you know, if you can even look at the wicks here around 63. So in and around that zone would be my next target. We did wick that here earlier today, so I am looking for a little bit of a bounce in the BTC dominance here. What does that mean? That means either the alts are just going to take a breather and Bitcoin's going to rally higher, or we're going to see a general pullback in the market and the alts underperforming Bitcoin on the way down. That could also cause this Bitcoin dominance chart to spike, and we could see a combination of both if we see some profit taking in some of those names. But at this point, we're just seeing a lot of rotation. So you see those names, especially the bigger cap names, run, then they pause, and then the laggards that have not really moved finally get a bid and start going again. And if we look at the Node Insider's site here, let me go to the trending list. You know, the names on here on the trending list, again, this is, for those of you that are not familiar, these are names versus Bitcoin. So these are helping us identify what are those names that are strong relative to BTC. And, you know, today Cardano is popping up. We'll look at that chart here shortly, catching up finally. ETH was a laggard for a while, if you remember. It was, you know, names like EOS and Bitcoin Cash that were just really on a tear, even Litecoin. And ETH finally caught up, and boy, oh boy, did it do some catch up. Very big moves here in the last week or two. And very nice. But the list is long right now because so many names are outperforming versus Bitcoin. And that's evident in that Bitcoin dominance chart. Tezos is one of the very strong names here as of late. You're seeing Quantum, Tron, Neo, Basic Attention, Monero has been on here for quite some time, just continues to chug higher. But there's a lot of new entrants here. Even Neo Gas made the list here recently. Somebody was asking about that during the live stream. We did take a look at that. Stellar. And so you can see the list is pretty diverse, but it's predominantly the bigger cap names at this point. And the question is, will we see a rotation finally into those small cap names again? And that's often what you do. So you'll see the bigger caps kind of take the show for a while, and then they pause, and you'll see some rotation into the mid cap, and then the small cap names will move in mass, and vice versa, and just kind of rinse repeat, right? Along the lines of the Node Insiders here, just going to taking a quick break. There is a trading bot that sends an email out every time this changes here on the Bitcoin strategies, both for the 4-hour and the daily. There was a request, you know, and some suggestions on this trading bot status for the alts that I have on here. And again, I have most of the top tier names on here versus Bitcoin, so the alt BTC pairs. And there was a request for getting emails on that. Ultimately, my plan is to set that up. But what I need to do first is enable some user configuration so that way people can manage that on their own accounts, just so that there's not a huge amount of emails that get sent by default. I'm trying to be mindful of the amount of emails people get, but if you choose to receive those, I'm going to enable that option. For now, however, I did add a tooltip to this, so what you can do is just hover over the bot status, long signal, short signal, flat signal, and it'll tell you when it was last updated. So when was this signal last on here, and you'll get that there very quickly just by hovering over. So for now, that's kind of the quick fix to help you guys understand, how old is that signal, when did this signal get sent, and eventually we'll roll over to the email fact and just let you guys get information that way. And as we progress little by little, this site will continue to see some improvements and updates and features. I appreciate all the feedback, the suggestions. Again, this is for us as traders, and so this is just as much yours as it is mine. Let's make this better together. So thanks for the feedback on all of that. So let's go back to some of the charts here and review some of these names that are on my list. Some of the names that were on the watch list from the stream this week here. I'm going to start with BAT BTC here. That was a breakout watch name. Did finally break out, and what I was watching was this broader daily chart here, right around that 2700 Satoshi level was the breakout point. Did finally push out of range, had a little bit of a throwback, and continues to move higher. That first target was around 3200 sat, and we can see there was a very quick wick right into that point, so has had a pretty good move, but the broader chart certainly looks positive still. The volume that came in on that breakout a couple days back was very good, and that 32 sat target was really, the swing high for these prior highs back in November and October. So in and around that range is what I was looking at. But near term, this just looks very positive, looks strong. So it was a nice move, not a huge move, but a pretty quick move, right? Up about 18% from that breakout point in just 2 days. And so good to see BTC moving up as BAT BTC outperforms in the near term, playing a little bit of catch up. So that was a good trade there. XLM BTC was another one. Somebody pointed out during the stream, this little cup and handle was identified. A very nice setup, was a position I did take as it started to edge out. Now, what I ended up doing is I got in right when this one broke out here. I liked the volume. Then Bitcoin went on that quick reversal from around 9,700 straight past 10K. And some of these alts saw a quick shakeout, but I just stuck with it. I figured they'd bounce back, and sure enough, we're seeing them bounce right back. And so this one is starting to break out from that cup and handle type of pattern. And we can see what I'm looking at here is this first lip there on the cup, the right cup here that forms that, and then you got the handle that was this small pullback that held around that 710 Satoshi level, and now we're seeing it break out. Getting over that 770 would be ideal, as that would really set up for a run into the 800 range, which is what I'm ultimately looking for on that trade. ETH, oh man, Ethereum has been on a tear lately. Let me go to a different exchange. Not a lot of volume there on Gemini. Looking at ETH, this was a watch item here. Did already have a really strong prior couple of weeks, but had that big push last week, then started to consolidate over the weekend, which was very healthy. My Friday video was, are the alts due for a pause? You saw a very minor pause, but it was very good, very constructive. Held the 22 EMA on that 4-hour chart, and then was really just setting up, and sure enough saw a nice little breakout here this week over the last couple of days. And if you look at the ETH USD chart, I mean, that one just continues to run very strongly, and just taking out all the targets. The last break was around that 190 level, then it rallied, paused over the weekend around 230, came back down to just below 220, and then yesterday peaking near $260, has been on quite the run. The big picture story, of course, as everyone is now aware of, I mean, it just seems like every other Ethereum chart I see on Twitter and on TradingView and everywhere, it's just this big picture double bottom, right? There was two double bottoms. First, this little small daily double bottom, which set up for this very strong run. And then there was the weekly double bottom, which is very much in play right now and is confirming by breaking out above this neckline here. So that was this big pullback that we saw going into September. The rally, the most recent low back here in January of this year, and then of course the big push higher. And that is a valid pattern. It's a very good move and really has room to run. The next major resistance on this double bottom, which is kind of the target here, is around that 2600 level or 0.026 level on the ETH BTC pair, up to around 0.027. So that's really your next major target, and this one certainly has room to run on the weekly chart before hitting anywhere near overbought levels. Now keep in mind, this is already 5 green weeks in a row. Very strong moves, certainly extended in the near term. And so, as I always say, if you're not already on this move, it takes some discipline to not FOMO into these and just look for those brief pauses, those periods of consolidation, much like we saw this weekend. I mean, this weekend was an ideal scenario where you had that rally, finally pause, pull back. It sets up these lows, these really tight areas from which you can take a stance and set that as your stop. In the event that it fails and just continues to roll over, you're not risking a whole lot for a good potential upside. So the risk reward ratio is in your favor when you look for those pauses, as opposed to guessing that it's just going to keep moving higher and jumping in when things are already a little bit extended like they are now. And yes, for those of you that are keen and watching these here, there is also a potential bearish divergence showing up here. Not on the MACD histogram again, so a little bit conflicting there, but you are starting to show some divergences on the RSI on the lower time frame. So certainly something to make note of. And again, I expect we'll continue to see some rotation in and around these names. EOS has just continued to grind higher. Still one of the stronger names out there. Very nice trend onto that guy there. Dash was a name we looked at during the stream, and look how tight this one is getting. It's decision time for Dash, just really sitting tight here. I'd be watching on the downside 1190 as your support on the BTC pair. You don't want to see it close below that, otherwise this is going to look like a failed move and you'll get another spike lower. On the upside, the breakout point is essentially around that 1320 to 1350 level on the upside, and starting to close above that, you can see things finally accelerate. But the daily chart has had plenty of time to cool off. The moving averages have now caught up. The RSI has gone flat. And so it's just a matter of what's the next big move going to be. Does it break higher? Now this would be a continuation pattern. So in theory, technically it favors the bulls. And so you'd expect to see some more upside testing. If we see a sharp pullback in Bitcoin, then I expect some of these big cap names will follow suit. And so a lot of it's going to depend on how the consolidation ultimately takes place. But Dash is certainly a breakout candidate to continue to watch. Hasn't moved yet during this week, so definitely one I'm watching here. 0x is another one that just continues to tread higher. Again, put in a nice little double bottom here on this daily chart. Cleared the downtrend resistance here. That was your early signal on February 4th on some very strong volume. And then finally clearing this horizontal price resistance here in the last couple of days. So just continues to march higher. Next major resistance is up in the 34 to 3600 range. That's what I'd be watching on the 0x BTC. Link BTC is also charging higher. One of the stronger names. We were watching this bigger pattern. Let me zoom out here. There was this big ascending base pattern that was setting up, and it's finally starting to clear the top of that. Just looking really strong. A little extended on the USD pair as well, but all in all, the big picture chart, the weekly especially, looks very positive for that one. So a lot of good alts, a lot of strong names showing up, but what about the small cap names? I mean, they haven't, we've seen some moves. For example, Mana last week, very big move, finally pausing here a little bit, but that one does have the public launch next week. So some fundamental factors there that were helping drive that. But if we look at the trending list here, I'm going to go back to the trending names. You're seeing some interesting names that just kind of cycle in and out here. Nano has been on the list for a while. Then you get these names like Siacoin and Golem, these names from yesteryear, and Steam. High performance blockchain has been on here as of late, I've noticed. And so it's kind of an interesting mix here. VeChain was moving nicely here recently, finally breaking higher. Algorand, Tomo Chain, Gas. So it's kind of an interesting mix where we're finally seeing some movement out of those big cap names and into some of these smaller cap mid-tier names. ARK, let's go to ARK. Not a name I personally like to trade because of the low liquidity. But this one did have a very strong move here. Lisk last week, if you remember, the last prior 2 weeks, was running very strongly, and ARK had that big spike higher. It was a one-day event, but if it's going to follow through, this is going to be where you want to see ARK start to bounce. If we zoom into that 4-hour chart, it has had a steady climb down right to these moving averages. The volume has really dried up, and so now it's kind of decision time. This yellow line going across was that breakout point on the daily chart, and so it's also back at that point. And I'd be watching it here. If you like ARK, this would be an interesting place to see if it can hold and set up for a second leg higher here. BNB versus BTC here. putting in a little bit of a bull flag, kind of pausing right at these moving averages. It's been on a good run already, but this could be setting up for another leg higher. However, if you go to the daily chart, still very much extended. I'd like to see it give a couple more days of pause. The daily 10 EMA is starting to finally catch up, but it went on such a fast move. Certainly got extended. You can see the RSI is starting to pull back in here a little bit. So I'd just be watching some of those for pullback entries. That's how I generally have been looking at this market. Unless it's a really tight range setup, then I'll take the breakout trade. But more often than not, I'm preferring the pullback entries as a better method for me to jump on some of those alt BTC pairs. But if we go back to the Node Insiders page and back to this bot status tab again, this is looking at the alt BTC pairs, and you can see just a good representation of this overall market right now. It wasn't that long ago, maybe a month or so ago, where things were still very mixed. There was a lot of red on the board. Just a handful of names were outperforming, and that has very quickly changed here in the last couple of weeks. Many strong names here, of course, no surprise to most of us. BAT, ETH, Link, Neotron, Tezos, very strong, and nothing showing red at this point. So a lot of things have moved back into that bullish camp. There are no short trades right now, both on the 4-hour and the daily bot status. Couple flat here, but for the most part just green across the board as so many of these alts continue to outperform Bitcoin, and that's really been the place to be. Again, look at that BTC dominance chart. It is starting to spike downward a little bit. These alts continue to move higher, and I'm curious to see if we finally get a bounce around that 62 to 63% mark on that Bitcoin dominance chart. So for now, the trend is your friend. Stay with it. Again, those levels that I marked out on the BTC side, going back to recap that, on the upside, basically between here and 11K is what I'm going to be watching. And then on the downside, just looking at the broader trend, these higher highs being set and held. The daily 10 EMA is kind of the first line in the sand. And then below that, 22 EMA, which is also this 9,500 level. Definitely want to see that one hold if we get a pullback, and that to keep the broader uptrend in place. So that's going to be it for now, my friends. Thanks for watching. We'll see how this plays out over the next couple of days. Look out for another video update or live stream on Friday. Till then, take care, everyone.